Welcome to Critical Conversations in Children's Literature, a web series I developed to bring children's literary writers in conversations with scholars to discuss critical topics brewing within the field. And of course, today we are two scholars and also two children's book authors on this call. My name is LaShawn Daly. I am an assistant professor in the Department of English and Comparative Literature here at San Diego State, and I am also the director of the Children's Literature Program, as well as the director of the National Center for the Study of Children's Literature. Yay, I said it all in one take. Today's conversation is centered on book banning, and today's guest is a dear colleague of mine, Virginia Loh-Hagan, who is the inaugural director of the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American APIDA Center here at San Diego State, as well as the author of more than 400 children's books. I wish we could have a whole conversation on that in itself. Perhaps we will. She has served as the faculty member at SDSU College of Education. She is the 2016 recipient of California Reading Association's Marcus Foster Memorial Award for Outstanding Achievement in Reading. And prior to working at SDSU, she was a K-8 classroom teacher, community college reading instructor, and program chair for an online university. Thank you, Virginia, for being here this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I want to ask, for those of our viewers who are unfamiliar with book banning, can you give us an overview of what book banning actually means?
Yeah, so we have two main concepts, like book banning and banned books and challenged books. So just definition, challenged books are books that have been questioned and requested to be taken out of circulation, print, etc. Let me get started and first define these concepts. So we talk about banned books and challenged books. So challenged books are when books are requested to be out of circulation or out of print, and you'll mainly see it in libraries and schools. So where, for example, parents, patrons, community members, etc., will ask for books to be removed. And so that's challenged. Banned means that those books got removed. So and usually based on the objection of a group. So I don't even want to, and I say that specifically because we're not talking about like everyone's band together and said, no, we got to get rid of these books. It's usually a group, a specific group that has taken offense to whatever is, idea or concept that's being presented. And then they are wanting to have those books removed or out of print. And some of the ideas that get challenged, for example, I will say some of the top, there's tons. Like we can get into all the silly stuff that I think gets banned or challenged, but some of the top ideas that get banned and challenges, or some of the top reasons for that is, for example, this is not age appropriate. We sexually explicit materials, profanity that's being used, and political ideas now, we have like anti-critical race theory, etc. So now we've got those type of ideas that are also being banned, censored and challenged. So the gamut, it runs wide. The reasons why people want books to be banned is wide. There's tons. And I like to use this example just because I do think, I think it's silly. I think it's ridiculous. But in How to Eat Fried Worms, which is a classic, I mean, I read it when I was growing up, right? That was challenged because it had a scene in which the father comes home from work and takes a beer from the refrigerator. And that was challenged because of that. And, so you'll have a book that is highly regarded and popular, etc. But in one page, the word stupid is said, or worse, and then it is banned. Captain Underpants, because he dared use the word underpants, has been banned. Judy Blume is one of the most banned children's authors as well, because it had, Judy Blume, are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. I mean, she's talking about topics like oh my God, menstruation, wow. That, for some reason our audiences should not know about. And then Harry Potter has been banned because it has magic and witches and, etc. So again, it's like the gamut of reasons why books get banned and challenged run wide, depending on various different groups. But so that's an overall definition of that. And we definitely see it more in terms of what children read than what adults read, right? We're more, for some reason, banning and censorship and challenging happens more with that market than it does the adult market, because I think part of my platform is that I think that I don't understand why we are so hesitant to have children read about these experiences that they're frankly already exposed to, or that they're going to be exposed to. But for some reason was sensitive about that. But I also feel like my platform too is I just don't believe in book banning, censorship, or challenging, because I don't think that I have the right to tell anybody what they can and cannot read. I can choose for myself. I can say that I won't read that for whatever principles I have, but I would never tell you that. And I would never tell anybody else what they can and cannot read. And I can, even with my own family, my own husband, I can strongly encourage him or discourage him, but I can't tell him what he can and cannot read. And in fact, what we know is that the opposite happens. The minute you tell me I can't read something, I'm going to read it. And I think that's why I applaud efforts from the American Library Association, et cetera, because they supported, banned book weeks, and they have their banned book list, et cetera. So I support those efforts to amplify, banned books and challenge books. And because we know sometimes it has the opposite effect as well, that if you're going to ban something, then it makes it more sexy. There's also a lot of problems with that too, because when authors hear that an idea of theirs or a book gets banned, it's personal. It's a personal attack. And it's also a breaking down of our democracy, because, we have the freedom to think, to critically think, and the freedom of speech and et cetera. And I think having groups that have organized effort around banning, challenging, censorship, et cetera, breaks that down. It's problematic. It's problematic for everybody.
Thank you for sharing that. And so many things that you brought up, I actually want more specifics, because I think it's actually really important to understand why certain families or communities are deciding that a particular book is not necessarily good for their child, or they want it for their child, and then saying, well, then it shouldn't be good for that whole population of children in that particular class. So I have one question, because one of the things that has come up for me as a scholar who looks at early African American children's literature in general is the use of the racial epithet, and how that has come in contention in terms of censorship. So how do we process things like that, in which we can ask and or need censorship in order to bring it into the classroom, versus something like, the word stupid being used, or someone talking about underpayments? Like, give us an understanding of how do we hold those two kind of important thoughts in our mind when we're talking about book banning, or even book challenging, or even censorship?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's a really meaty question to think about. And okay, so I believe in historical accuracy, right? So I do think that we do need to measure things in the context, in historical context, the context of time, etc. So there's that, but it's not as easy as that. So it's complicated, because then I also think we have to consider who is saying it. Like, for example, as an Asian American author, I think that I have more license, for example, to use racial slurs that have been targeted against my community, right? I feel like I may be in a better position than you, right, to do that. And so, and then of course, like I wouldn't do it. I also think it's important as a writer to think like why and how and what impact it's going to make. I wouldn't do it if I could get away with using another word or another phrase, turn of phrase, or another action or whatever. If I can avoid it with something else, that's fine. But if the scene that I'm writing calls for that use of a racial epithet because it is part of the story, because it is necessary to describe the setting, because whatever, if I find as an author and I make that choice that that's what I want to do, I've made that choice that fits. So I think I feel very comfortable doing that. Now, if you've asked me, and I'm just going to be candid with you, but if you ask me if I'm developing a story and you ask me my comfort level and let's say using the N-word, even if that was appropriate for that story and that time, I would not. So I also think we have to, yes, there's a historical context we have to think about, but we also have to think of you as a writer and how much ownership, you know, do you have the right? Like that, and we can dig into that comment alone, but like, do you have the right to say it? Right. So I think that there are, there's that as well. And I do think that there are ways that people can do it and it's done well. Not that it's done well, because it never should be. Again, this is such a good question because there's so much you can get into this. But it's like I can understand the rationale and the reason. I can get it, you know, especially if I'm reading a story, and that's the whole point. You want to develop that. But I do think there's a lot of things that have to be considered. You know, like if you can use it, and then if you can use it, should you use it? Right. So those are questions. But I also think like we can't, in isolating it, like calling out, let's say if a group were to ban and challenge a book because it uses a racial epithet and it just focuses on that one word, on that one page, in that one paragraph and nothing else, I think that's problematic. Because we have to consider the context. For example, Baseball Saved Us, which is a lovely, lovely book about the Japanese incarceration experience. The author uses the word Jap, JAP, as a racial epithet. And that was banned and challenged. And I can understand why. I get it, because it's not a good word. We should not be using it, especially in the connotation that it has been used. It's not a good word. But in the context of the story, it made sense. And the author himself is a Japanese American. So he made a choice to do that. And then I think, for example, if we're going to teach it in schools, and I was a K-8 teacher myself, so I get it. If we're going to teach it, instead of banning it, I think it's an opportunity to have a conversation about it. How do kids know whether or not it's going to be a good or bad thing to say if we don't have conversations about it? There's this lovely book by Alan Sade too that's called El Chino. It's a conversation. It's like, is that a bad word or is it a good word? And in you know, Latin American and South American cultures, El Chino is used to refer to anybody Asian. Literally, it translates to Chinese, but it's used. And in some ways, it is a bad word. It's used as a racial epithet. But then in others, it's the word. It's what a person is called, right? But I think that instead of, again, banning, challenging, censoring, having conversations about that. And then also, this goes back to the power of words, right? Because then it's like we are, obviously the word is so powerful enough that it invokes all this history, feeling, sentiments, etc. And then it charges a crowd to to attack it, right? So it's like, words are powerful, we know that. So then if words are powerful, I guess I'm also, you know, like trying to grapple with the notion of you know, why people ban and censor and challenge in the first place. But I'm also like, okay, so if we go with the notion that words are powerful, but then I feel like the same people that are banning these concepts also are then rejecting notions of pronouns and rejecting other like identities, reclaiming, etc. Like they reject those notions too, and it's like you can't have it both ways. Like you can't reject you can't reject like words in this space and then reject words in this space. Like it's, to me, the argument is the same, but then yet like you're interpreting different ways. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's so complicated, but for me, what makes it easy is for folks to take care of yourself. It is, these concepts are extremely complicated. So if you like, and to make it easy, again, just you decide what you want to read and what you don't want to read, but you do not have the right to determine what other people can read and say. So I just, yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of a conundrum for me.
It is, and I think again why these kind of conversations are needed, because it's not always easy, but it's something that we can continue to reflect on, and by being in conversation, we can also reflect on it for ourselves. You have been in the K-8 classroom, and you just quickly talked about what it's like to have the opportunity to say, okay, as a parent, I don't want my child reading this. However, we know that challenging and book banning really impacts the whole class. So let's say a parent does, and perhaps you can offer this kind of suggestion on how teachers or parents or even students can work through this process of, well, I'm not really comfortable with this text, but how do I work through that with my teacher, with my family, or with my parent? Maybe the child wants to read that book, but yet the parent's like, no, I don't think it's age appropriate, or it's just not a part of what I think our family values is about. Like, what are some ways or tips or experiences that you have where we can really start to think, how do we start to have this conversation around banning when it's personally you don't want it, but perhaps you're not wanting it impacts others? Have you seen or noticed anything where that can work well, or is it always going to be banning books or not banning books?
Oh God, this is such a hard topic. And you brought up several different things that topics that I can address to here, but I'll take one angle, which is, from the parent and patron end of it. I mean, you could talk to your teacher about having an alternative assignment. I don't think that it's fair for that person then to say like, no other kid can read it. But I do think it's fair that you bring up, I'm not comfortable with my child reading this. Can my child have an alternative assignment, or be placed in another room during this time, or, et cetera, or given headsets, and because I remember I'm thinking specifically from experience, because when I was teaching, around Halloween time, I reread Roald Dahl's, I read aloud, not reread, sorry. I read aloud Roald Dahl's The Witches. And, I had a parent who was upset about that, and approached me about it too. And, it's like, we have a listening station. Your child can go there, but unless other folks having issue with it, like I don't, I just don't see. It's an awesome book. I love Roald Dahl's books, and The Witches is probably one of my favorite. But I'm also like, if I start, it never, because in my mind, the things that are going on in my mind too is like, gosh, it'll never stop. Because then, if it starts with the witches, but then there's all these other topics, I am not going to be able to, even teaching math, I realized was controversial. And I say that, and I know I'm kind of jumping sub topics, but it fits. Like, for example, like I taught math, long division in one way. And the way that I think most of us in the United States have learned it. I bring down the arrow, like whatever, all of that, right? Evidently, there's other ways to teach long division. And, I remember I had a parent come in and was upset because his son was telling him that he doesn't know how to do long division. And that, like, I thought it was funny, but it also wasn't. Like, it was a serious conversation. He was upset because he was an engineer. He's like, tell my son, I know how to do long division. He's like, but I'm not doing the way you're doing it. So he's upset, da, da, da. And so it's like, I just bring that up, like there's math is controversial, you know, I mean, like you get into, once I start censoring, let's say the witches, it's like, where does it stop? You know, I mean, I understand the issue of age appropriateness in terms of, for example, like I get that I'm not going to teach sex education to kindergartners. I mean, I get that that does not make sense. They don't understand the concepts yet, right? So I get that, but also I feel like we use this notion of age appropriateness for so many things when it's not. Like we're talking about, like let's think about some high school books that have been banned, and they have been about drugs and alcohol. And are you really telling me that they're not exposed to that already? From, you know, their, like either from TV, the media, or like from their walking the halls. They're exposed to, you know, sex, drugs, alcohol, all of that. Why not use it as a conversation? You know, ignoring the topic, thinking that, you know, assuming that kids are going to abstain or be sheltered is also not productive. So I understand the issue of age appropriateness, but I also think that we use it way too liberally. I think that we need to have some critical conversations with your students, with your kids, instead of just banning. And I think that, you know, okay, so you brought up the issue of what like parents and patrons can do. I also want to talk about what teachers can do. And I know the reality is that, you know, if you are an untenured teacher and you're single and or even a single mom or whatever, you don't have as many options, right? As let's say somebody like me that is going to be like, I don't care, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to read the witches if I want to read the witches, you know? So it's like, you may not have that option. You may have to, it could be your job. Right. So I get that, though, that's not an easy solution either. So I get that there may be you know, the considerations, other considerations besides just fighting this notion of being banned, censored, and challenged. I think that you also have to consider like your personal needs and safety as well. And I also mentioned safety because it doesn't feel good to have people fight against you, you know. And I think that we have a risk of mob mentality, like people getting together, organizing, etc. And that's hard to fight, especially if you're living in a demographic area that is more conservative, I guess, or like, you know, have different ideas than you. It's hard to be that person. So I understand that too. So I would say choose your personal safety in those circumstances, but then, like, you know, go home and read a banned book. You know, like find ways of personal resistance, but you have to choose safety. But I also feel like, know that there's a big advocacy group for you, you know, like the American Libraries Association, freedom of speech groups, me, you. You know, I mean, you have allies in this space, but I get where it's hard to stand up. And I would say right now too, you know, okay, over all throughout time, the books that have been banned the most are going to be about communities of color and LGBTQ, right? So I think those are the books that get banned and censored the most when we're talking about specific communities. And this is walking away from the age appropriateness, sex, drugs, alcohol conversation. But the books that tend to get banned are focused on communities of color. The authors that get banned tend to be authors of color, etc. And I would say right now in this moment, what I see with the trends is the books that are getting banned the most are about LGBTQ and Japanese incarceration. And you know, again, it's like it's how can we not racialize it? You know, so the notion of book banning and so what type, if so I racialize it to say those are the type of books that get banned and challenged. So then what's left? What's left are books about white, cisgender, like heterosexual, mainstream, middle-class families. And that does not represent who we are. And I also think that it doesn't allow for the beauty that is diversity in stories.
I agree. And thinking about what stories are left, and perhaps this is also somewhat of a controversial question, book banning is also now what seemed subcultural about book banning seems a part of popular culture, right? Book ban week. If your book is banned, sometimes that augments your finances in a particular kind of way. So I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about, right, there's this kind of advocacy for the way books are banned so that we have an opportunity for people to have multiple kinds of experience, like you're saying. And I feel like there was a subculture around book banning. There's this kind of grassroots, let's not do that. But now it is like mainstream to participate in terms of book banning. How are you feeling, or what do you think we should be thinking about as now book banning becomes kind of more corporate operation of come buy the banned books that we're selling, right? Like, how do we go from this space of advocacy and critical thinking and really wanting opportunities for people to experience different kinds of worlds towards what's happening with the kind of commercialization of book banning?
So, dare I say that I actually don't think it's a bad thing. I think the commercialization of it just means that there's a bigger platform, and there's more support, there's more attention, there's more, like, the machine is now like taken over, right? I don't think that's a bad thing. I think what I do think that is bad though is hypocrisy, I think, is bad. So it's like, for example, it's like if you're going to follow the bandwagon of let's support banned books, but yet you're like, but oh no, they shouldn't be reading that. It's like, it's performative at that level, right? So you don't really believe in the cause, but it's a popular thing right now, so you're going to jump on board. But, or like people that, I think this goes with the whole performative issue anyway. So the people that think they're liberal, but really aren't. I think it's that, to me, the hypocrisy is problematic. So I want to also say, like, because there are huge conversations about what performative activism is, there's huge conversations about that. But I want to say, like, again, it's like partly I think like everything in a way is performative, and we need it to be, because if it's not public, because that's what performative means to me, is like it's public. If it's not public, it doesn't happen. So to me, a certain level of performative is effective. So I'm fine with that. But I go back to hypocrisy. It's like, you cannot be, it's like, don't put up a Stop Asian Hate sign and then you go home and then you are racist against the Asian community. Like, that to me is hypocrisy. So don't do that. I mean, you don't have to march the streets, you don't have to I don't think that like, I'm okay if, like, let's say you put it on social media, like Stop Asian Hate, whatever, or stop or buy a banned book. I'm okay with you doing that if that's all you do, right? But then don't go home and then like tell people they can't read something, or make a racist comment. That's the hypocrisy is what bothers me, not the performative, because I believe that people do what they can, when they can, how they can, and that is fine. But don't think that you're woke when you're not, right? So, and the same thing, it's like, don't like support the banned books movement if at the same time you're going to go around telling people not to read something. Now, I also think I'm getting into a silly type of topic, but then I think, like, one of the things that we know, like Oprah's book club, for example, or any book club in general, and being authors ourselves, what we know is the biggest seller is word of mouth. So it's doing that, is people telling people what to read and what not to read. So you have this notion of the book recommendation, right? That is different from book banning, though. So it's like, I think that, although I have out of my mouth have said, don't read that book, it's garbage. I've said it. That is different from me saying like, don't read this book because it's about witches and it is against my beliefs. You know, it's like I'm judging this book on its merit. And I'm saying don't read it because it's poorly written. So
It's true, there is a difference. There is a difference.
there is a difference, but I'm like humorously in my head, I'm also seeing like, okay, I see where it's similar, but they're different. I'm not having an organized movement to ban the book off shelves, etc., because I think that like the ideas are dangerous, you know. And again, as a teacher and a writer myself, it would be like, don't read this book because I don't want you to like have poor writing skills. But that's, you know, that's a whole different type of like.
It's true for the next critical conversation. Well, we're just a few minutes out, so I'm wondering, again, as people are perhaps coming to this banned book conversation for the first time, where do you see the projection towards banning books? Do you see it galvanizing kind of more support? Do you feel like it's always just going to phase in and out according to Banned Book Week? Like, what are your projections, or maybe perhaps some last understanding of what people can take away when it comes to this conversation around banning books?
I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, it's been for, we look at history, centuries of banning books. I mean, from like specifically from communities too. You know, enslaved folks were not allowed to read. Women were not allowed to read. You know, so lower classes were not allowed to read. So we know that books have been banned, right? So that since the printing press, since books have been a thing, it has been banned for certain audiences. And I think like we see an iteration where it has evolved now to certain ideas that get banned, right? I think that I don't think it's going to go away. This notion of banning, censoring, challenging will not go away. But I do think that we're going to see different iterations. It's going to be called something else, and it's the same thing. So like, for example, anti-CRT, you know, I mean, that to me is essentially book banning, censoring, challenging.
And can you quickly say what that means, just for people who are watching who may not know what CRT is?
Sure. So critical race theory. So, you know, basically, you know, ideologies that challenge patriarchy and white supremacy, etc., that basically take a look at inequities. And you know, I think it has been it's been poorly positioned, you know, as being anti-white or anti-American, and it's not. It's this notion of, in fact, wanting to be more American because we want to, again, like just diversify the story, diversify the narrative. For example, I brought up that Japanese incarceration rates have been banned because the accusation is that it presents an anti-American view because, you know, it factually brings up how or conveys how the US government incarcerated hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans who are perceived to be the enemy during World War II because we were at war with Japan. That's a fact. That is a historical fact, that the United States government did that. How do we know? We have the executive order. We have primary sources. We have, I mean, it's a fact. So it is not anti-American to bring that up as a fact, right? I also think that like it is within our amendments, it's within our rights to challenge the government and to critically analyze it, etc. So we may have alternative perspectives. We may have you know, different ways of looking at things, but the history is history. It's there. And so I think that that's kind of what, to me, that's kind of what has been like book banning, censoring has been changed into this anti-American, anti blah, blah, blah. But then I go back to then what stories are left? What stories are left? And so censoring will evolve, but then also so will the resistance. the resistance will evolve too. Because now, that like, that's why I think the commercialization is good too. Because once you get, like that momentum going, it's harder to fight, right? Because it's a thing, it's trendy. And I also think that we have a generation, this is where I have such like faith in our future as well, because we have a generation of students who are seeking to be woke, so they are activated, and they are challenged by these ideas, and so I think that I think that they will evolve what the resistance looks like. So yeah, I don't know, I mean, I don't see it going away, I just see it taking different forms, but I see a need for us to all be vigilant, and that, again, like at the very least, I would say stay in your lane. If you do nothing else, stay in your lane. Take care of what you and yours reads, right? But like I would really sit back and question anybody's desire, need, motivation to control what other people read. In my head, I just don't see, I'm having a hard time grappling that. I'm like, I could not imagine telling you what you can read. So it would be hard for me to get into the mindset of somebody that thinks they could do that, because it floors me. I don't see how we can do that. But one more thing you brought up too that I want to attack. So not attack, but address. Sorry, poor choice of words. But that I want to address is, yes, like banning the banned books can be commodified. Like, we know that it makes money being banned, and I have often joked, like, ban my books, like I want to get money, blah blah blah, but it's actually not the case. Only big time, like, you have to make money off a banned book, you have to hit it big. So it has to be like a big, like a book that is a bestseller, that has been banned, etc. Otherwise, it hurts all other books, because they're not going to be carried, because it's less, folks are not going to want to take the risk. But let's say banning one of my books hurts me. Because school librarians and teachers are just not going to carry it, because they're not going to take a risk on, I don't mean to, I'm not trying to diminish or denigrate myself, but a little old author like me, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's, and I hate when people do that too. So I'm awesome. I do a lot. So I don't mean to.
But no, I think it's true. I think it does make a difference in terms of what seems like celebrity status, regardless of what you offer as an author, right? You're all working in this industry, but there is a difference between what does it mean to have someone who has like the celebrity status being banned versus someone who's not at that quote unquote celebrity level.
Right, like us working authors, right?
Right. Continued working authors,
yes,
exactly.
Yeah, like J.K. Rowling can do whatever she wants. I cannot, so yeah, like I would not be able to survive if there were a concerted effort to ban my books. I would not have the same type of protection as as J.K. Rowling. So that's where it can be hurtful. So just to keep that in mind too, because you're against a specific idea. I also think about that too. It's like you're affecting people's livelihoods, and you're also again, like, controlling what other people, what they can and cannot read and share with their children. I don't see where anybody has the right to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, this is something I feel like we're gonna have to have a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4. I definitely want to just thank you for getting this conversation started on this channel, for being such a proponent for this kinds of conversation and critical thinking around children's literature. And just thank you for the work that you're doing in the classroom, outside of the classroom, on campus, off campus. I just appreciate having you as a mentor and as a colleague. And I hope to have you on our web series again soon.
Absolutely. Well, I love to talk, so.
Wonderful. Okay.